You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYBC.
WCYTV
Here on the Daily Signal.
Good evening and welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WYBC out of Indianapolis. If you are tuning in via the syndication network down in Pensacola, polls are closed and those votes are being tallied as we speak. Now, because it's Florida and Florida has election policies that don't suck, we are expecting the two Florida congressional elections, the two special elections to replace the Matt Gaetz seat in Congressional District 1 and Mike Waltz's seat in Florida's Congressional District 6. We expect those to come in during the show. 26% reporting already in the House 6 special election, and that is a major point of contention. While Florida's Congressional 6th was, at least at the start, a Trump plus 30 district, very deep red area, lot of red counties in central Florida. Well, the Democrats then threw in all kinds of money, $9.5 million in to support Josh Weil, the 40-year-old Democratic nominee, former public school teacher, over the state senator, Randy Fine. We'll get to that in a bit because I'm sure the next time we talk about it, it's going to have some huge election stuff and news to go with it. This all, however, ties into the major left-wing strategy at the moment. And this is the result of what happens when you don't have a strategy. The left has been on permanent defense mode. And I don't mean defense as in they have a coordinated plan about how they're going to push back against the Trump administration, against the slim Republican majority in the House, whether the Republican majority in the Senate. We're not talking about just a very skilled kind of defensive strategy here. We're talking about just simple reactionism because there is no plan. When the DNC chair, Ken Martin, put forward his big 5-page memo on how they're going to beat Trump, the answer was we're going to sing old Union songs. And then when the Republican continuing resolution came through, Schumer caved because he didn't want to shut the government down. And the Democrats have been in a tizzy ever since. And so this has resulted in just throwing a fit. Case in point, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, the old Mr. Potato Head himself with his angry eyes, he hit the floor of the Senate today to rant, or excuse me, he hit the floor of the Senate yesterday to start ranting. He's now gone on for like 24 hours. Everyone's talking about this being the longest filibuster now possibly of the history of the United States Senate. Only, I'm going to tell you a secret. He's not filibustering anything. See, a filibuster works when you have a majority that is not over 60 votes. So you have someone on the floor of the Senate that goes and just starts talking to hold up the business of the United States Senate. So the Senate cannot move forward and pass the bill. And so whoever has the floor, they get up there and they start talking. This is where you hear the reading from the phone book joke, or the one particular filibustering in which someone read the entire synopsis of Star Wars: A New Hope. This is a common strategy for attention seeking on the floor of the Senate. Only Cory Booker's not filibustering anything here. Because when I heard that Cory Booker was filibustering, I thought, what bill is currently in the Senate that is like a very serious concern here for the Dems? Is there like a financial thing? Is there some kind of a cultural bill? Is this on crime, immigration? What is it? No. Cory Booker's just yell into the trees about nothing, just because he doesn't like Trump and Elon Musk, he says. Here's a Cory Booker, just mad.
To call to the conscience of this nation, to say I will not stand for another American to lose their health care for a billionaire.
Okay, just real quick, I can't help it. For those who are listening to the show and they're not watching it, Cory Booker walks up more wide-eyed than a white-tailed doe on meth standing in the middle of the interstate. His eyes are the size of full-on Charger dinner plates. I have seen like main course plates at the IKEA buffet that are somehow smaller than Cory Booker's eyes. The man is genuinely concerning. But, giving up lives to billionaires, clearly he has the floor.
I will not stand for another veteran who's dedicated to stopping the suicide of other veterans to lose their job. I won't stand for the air quality in my community to be made worse because they're letting polluters pollute more. I won't stand for the collective assaults on the Constitution by a man who even the highest judge in our land, a Republican-appointed judge, said stop threatening and bullying other branches of government.
He didn't say that, by the way, but anyway.
When is it going to be enough? My voice is inadequate. My efforts today are inadequate.
You said it, and then he just yelled for a little bit longer. Again, not actually talking about anything substantive, because so far the CBS YouGov poll that recently came out shows that Americans are pretty in favor of most of the stuff Trump's doing. Now, a lot of Americans are a little bit concerned about the tariffs that are coming up because it's something that hasn't been done in a century, and there's a lot of confidence coming from the administration over it. But the Americans are just kind of waiting, in the most part, on this particular set of policies. Those drop tomorrow, April 2nd. Now, the thing that Americans are in massive favor of is Trump's illegal immigration and deporting of violent criminals policy plan. And I say policy plan because this is a series of executive orders and agency policies in which the President of the United States has pledged to rid the United States of the Tren de Araguas gang members, MS-13 gang members, the individuals who have been on the news, who were let into the country and allowed to stay, who ended up raping and killing American men, women, and children. Not to mention the fentanyl that they're trafficking in. And I'm so sorry. I forgot one other little piece of fun about Cory Booker here. One of his staffers was arrested a few hours ago for carrying a gun on Capitol grounds, which is very, very illegal. I'm so sorry I forgot to mention that. Sorry, back to the illegal immigration issue. The Atlantic, who is riding on the high of this exciting story they had on this Signal group chat message, which now all of the minor Democrats who haven't got the message that Americans really don't care. The minor Democrats around the country are still desperately trying to claim that Americans care about this Pete Hegseth Signal chat scandal. I don't think so. Poll data doesn't show that. You've got a weird amount of overexcitement from the Atlantic crew, thinking they can just run whatever story they want and everyone will automatically believe it, and it'll be a huge problem for the Trump administration. So the Atlantic released a story earlier last night suggesting that the Trump administration had taken this innocent, wonderful Maryland father who was on his way to pick up, my explanation here is not good enough. Here's Jamie Raskin, Raskin the Rascal, ranking Democrat over in on the House committee side, pitching a fit about this Atlantic story. Let him tell you the tale.
By Congress. Well, the majority says it's because these are radical judges. And they lead off, as our good Chairman Issa did, with Judge Jeb Boasberg, the chief judge of the District Court of the District of Columbia, who enjoined the mass roundup and deportation of immigrants to an infamous El Salvadoran prison in peacetime without any due process at all, allegedly under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, a statute explicitly limited to wartime and military invasion. Some of our colleagues have been railing against Judge Boasberg for ordering the planes to be turned around. They say those planes were filled with terrorists, I think my good friend from Texas said. Well, here's one person of many who wasn't a terrorist on that flight or a gangbanger. His name's Kilmer Garcia. He's a Marylander married to a U.S. citizen.
Well, keep going.
Who has a 5-year-old son with autism. And he went to pick up his son, but he was picked up first by ICE. And then he was shackled and put on that airplane and shipped off to the torturers of El Salvador without ever having the benefit of those two most beautiful words in the English language, due process.
Okay, so here's the story. There's this Maryland guy, and he's just a loving father of an autistic child, and he was going home with some groceries, the milk, and the cigarettes, and then ICE just scooped him up and sent him to El Salvador. Oh, they're leaving, just a little bit out of there. We got to send the radio crew over to commercial. Be back in just a second. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. Now, go figure, right, as we send the radio crew off to commercial, we do have breaking news. The first of the Florida races has been called. Florida's 6th Congressional District has now been called for Senator Randy Fine, the Republican, over Josh Whale, the 40-year-old Democratic nominee. $9.5 million funneled from Democrats into Florida's 6th Congressional since mid-March. That race has now been called for the GOP, with about 50% reporting in, and there are a few that will be counted again before the end of the show. At the moment, Randy is at least 3 to 5 points ahead, and it is not getting any better. A lot of the areas left to count are even deeper red districts than one might think. So that is the first of the 3 major races this evening that has been called by news outlets in Florida and on the international stage in favor of State Senator Randy Fine. Now, back to the major breaking super scandal over from Florida, over from the Atlantic. Here's the problem. In original documents from this particular individual from Maryland, it turns out that actually, in 2019, an immigration judge found sufficient evidence to suggest that, yeah, this guy is a member of MS-13, the Mexican gang and trafficking organization. Now, the left has come out in droves immediately and said, well, actually, he hasn't been convicted of that. Well, true. We don't actually put illegal immigrants up on the stand and then put them in front of a jury to be convicted of being in a gang. That's not something that's done in the United States. If you're suspected of being in a gang as an illegal immigrant, we boot you. Why does the United States have to spend resources on an individual in this country if we suspect they are a member of a Venezuelan or Mexican or from anywhere around the world kind of gang? Now, here's where things get a little bit more fun. The left suggests that, oh, well, it was just some friend or like random tertiary person who, at this arrest at a Home Depot parking lot, suggested the guy was a member of MS-13, but that's like very unsubstantiated. The judge back in 2019 put the individual on the do not fly list, and there is apparently, this is the part that we don't know, but there is considerable concern over this individual's involvement in the human trafficking side of MS-13. So it was, in fact, an administrative error that this individual was deported this soon. But as to the idea that, oh, well, the Trump, they're just picking up anybody, like just dads of like innocent children, innocent parents are being deported out of here. No. And the Atlantic doing their rootin' tootinest to try to make sure that the Trump administration is roasted over illegal immigration is going to backfire, because this is what the left always does. And we've said this before. We'll say it again. The left always goes too far, too fast. Way too far, way too fast. And the issue that they have is they take something that's working, whether it's a federal judge injunction, whether it's a report from the Atlantic, whether it's, a bit of damning information. They take it and they say, this is evidence that this molehill is really a mountain. And so we're going to go 1,000 miles an hour on this. We're going to get everybody involved. We're going to say it's the biggest, most massive, most terrible, whatever. And then it turns out that once they have been caught lying, well, no one trusts them on the rest of their accusations. And it's the same with the left. Once the district court judges have come in, they've parachuted in, and they've started issuing a bunch of rulings that are antithetical to how the Constitution was written and currently functions, well, turns out, hey, people don't really care for that. All right, we've got to bring the radio crew back in. All right, if you are just now joining us here on the Radio Syndication Network or on the live stream, breaking news from down in Florida, the 6th Congressional District has been called for the Republican candidate, State Senator Randy Fine. Again, the 6th Congressional District, this first of 3 special elections that the nation's attention is focused on today, to fill Representative Mike Waltz, now the National Security Advisor, has been called for Randy Fine. Again, this is a major race, given that $9.5 million was spent from Democrats for Josh Whale since the middle of March. So just a couple of weeks ago, money started flooding in. And this all ties into how the left handles major elections and how Republicans handle major elections. There was a state Senate and a state representative race in Pennsylvania a couple of days ago in which Democrat candidates came out and ended up beating Republicans in very deep red areas that had been deep red for a very, very long time. And after we saw these elections go to the Democrat candidate, all of the media, all of the Democrats came out and said, see, this is the nation that was responding to Trump. They don't like him. They can't stand him. Even Republican areas are going for the blue. No, that was a very, very poor way to view what was going on. And allow me to explain why. Because Democrats treat every single election as though it's the presidential. Every single one. Democrats take every state race, every national race, and every special election, and they throw their entire body weight into it. They throw in all of the funding they can. George Soros pumps $1 million, $20 million, $30, $40, $50 million into a particular race, like with Susan Crawford versus Brad Schimmel up in Wisconsin. And they throw all of their social messaging, they throw all of their campaign resources into a particular race. And in this case, you have, in the case down in Florida's 6th, you have Josh Whale outspending Randy Fine something like 30-1, which is insane. Insane. At the end of the election cycle, his last cash report, Randy Fine showed a paltry $93,000. The word paltry there is from the New York Times. And of course, Whale closed out with $9.5 million. That's quite the difference. That is a massive difference right at the end of the race. So, what does that mean here for Republicans? Why was the Pennsylvania situation not endemic for the entire country? And why I don't necessarily believe that if we do see the race now called for the 6th, and especially with some of the early voting data that we're getting out from Wisconsin, and not to mention Scott Pressler and his team out there as well. And then on top of that, over in the Florida's 1st Congressional District, the Matt Gaetz seat, that's a more stable race for Jimmy Patronis. I think that what you're seeing now is a Republican Party that is starting to understand you have to play by the same rules that the left is playing by. And I'm completely throwing my script out here for a second. Believe me, I promise we'll come back if we have to do bonus tonus at the end of tonight, which always sends both producer Daniel and producer Allison into an immediate cardiac fit. I had a conversation with a YouTube creator, guy who made a lot of popular videos in the mid-aughts, by the name of Julian Smith. Very, very funny guy, brilliant creator, brilliant director, has an amazing understanding of writing. He also has an amazing understanding of how people view entertainment, how they view culture, and how they express narratives and how they receive them. And we're having a conversation because, Julian Smith was a guy that when I was growing up, I loved his work, thought he was a phenomenal creator, and throughout watching his stuff, I was always amazed at how relatable the kind of stuff that he put out, was. And I, making my full career broadcasting now for the Daily Signal, I wanted to know what his advice was. That wasn't just the surface level advice, like you got to work hard and you got to give it your all. But I wanted some really good advice. Like if I wanted to be good, I like to pursue excellence. I like things to be done correctly. And when I was talking to him, Julian was recommending a couple of things that I found a little bit weird. One of those being very flashy thumbnails, like the image that is the advertisement for the video that you see on platforms like YouTube. And he said, you need to have these kind of platforms. And I said, I don't really know if he said, you need these thumbnails. I said, I don't know, man. I don't think it's necessary that I kind of try to blitz people into watching the video. And he cut me off. And he said, when you play Monopoly, he said, do you play by the rules of the game, or do you play how you think the game should be played? And I kind of got what he meant, but I said, well, you play by the rules of the game. And he said, are there any rules in Monopoly that you don't like? And I said, well, yeah, there are rules in Monopoly that I don't like. He said, but you still use those rules when you are playing to your advantage because you want to win. And I agreed, because how can you not agree with that? And his closing point in our conversation, his closing piece of advice was that you need to play by the same rules that the rest of the field is playing with. Otherwise, you are handicapping yourself for no reason. Republicans need to treat elections the same way that Democrats treat elections. Republicans need to go all in for every election. Herein is the reason why the left is throwing a tantrum over Elon Musk. You want to know why they're freaking out about the Teslas? It's not really about Elon Musk exposing waste, fraud, and abuse, even though that is something that's funding a lot of left-wing 501c4 nonprofit groups, like Stacey Abrams and her cash cow down in Georgia. But when you're looking at why the left despises Elon Musk, it is because of how he acted at the end of the Trump-Harris election cycle and how he has acted in the last few strides of this election between Brad Schimmel, the constitutional originalist, and Susan Crawford, who believes that Constitution be damned, do whatever you want. Elon Musk started throwing money into the race. And then he started saying, if you get out here and you post a picture with you and a couple of other people in Wisconsin, and the people who are registered to vote in Wisconsin have up a piece of paper and it says vote for Brad on it, I will give you $20 a head for posting that picture. And the left is losing it. I mean, I'm seeing all of these whiny posts all over the internet. People that are so just offended and just horrified. Oh, this is poor civic engagement. Oh, how could he be so gauche and so horrible and involving money in elections? George Soros, the DNC, Act Blue, has been doing this exact kind of social media strategy since Obama term 1. And Republicans are finally getting with the program, and they are getting out there and they are doing all of the door knocking, and they're driving people to the polls. And they're making sure that every law is prosecuted to the fullest, because Republicans, for the first time, want to win elections that are not just the presidency. And it kind of matters, because Trump is in office right now, and you have a Senate that's not a 60-vote majority for Republicans, so there's a lot of things that the Congress can't pass. And you have a very slim majority in the House, to where we have to spend massive amounts of national attention on these elections. And that all boils down to how the United States faces its biggest challenge in the next decade, or under a decade at this point, about 6 years, until we hit the complete insolvency of Social Security. And that's going to screw everything up real quick. So we've got Mike Murphy on from the Committee for the Responsible Budget up here in just a moment. Radio crew, we're going to send you to commercial. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast. If Republicans start taking elections seriously, every one of them, every state election, every local election, especially the special elections that involve Supreme Court justices like in Wisconsin, or Republican or Democrat districts down in Florida, then that is going to completely change the playing field, because pretty soon it becomes less about energizing the Republican base, and it becomes about energizing the coalition of the Republican Party. When you actually get people out to vote, so that the teachers union crew is no longer the biggest group of voters, you start seeing some pretty curious results. All of a sudden, primaries become interesting. All of a sudden, when you take advantage of people paying attention, and by taking advantage, I mean you take advantage of their attention on the political atmosphere to say, hey, this is going to affect you immediately. This Wisconsin Supreme Court election affects every one of you, because this is going to likely result in the redistricting of 2 seats in the House of Representatives, heavy gerrymandering, which means that because we're riding on such a razor thin edge in the House right now, it could, before we even get to the midterms, flip the House of Representatives. That's a pretty serious election. Now, as we move forward onto kind of the rest of the fits that the left is throwing this evening, this brings us to how the left did a lot of their campaigning in these particular races. So, hey, if you're going to get out and you're going to campaign for Democrats in Florida, a gay furry march is apparently the way to do it. Yes, I said a gay furry march. So people who are like a pride parade, but with dog masks and a lot of unnecessary noises.
Wait, can you? We have to get a photo. We have to get a photo.
Well, I don't know how that didn't just rally out every person leaning blue out to the polls right away. I can't possibly imagine why that wouldn't be a great advertisement for the left. In Eau Claire, a professor just straight up flipped over a college Republican table up at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire today. The group reports that the professor is Jose Felipe Alvergue, the chair of the English department. Excuse me, the group does not just report that now. The university has in fact confirmed it. Look at this goober. All progressive. They all the hair. It's all in the hair. The hair is disheveled, like it was combed with broken glass and the disappointment of parents. Flipped over the table because, nothing says mentally stable like flipping over a table of college students that have the gall to be Republicans. This is, of course, after he left because they didn't have their phone out recording it when he came up. But flipped over all of their stuff. Again, they're just tabling encouraging people to vote for Brad Schimmel. That's it. The left is just trying full tantrum strategy, whether that comes in the form of burning down Teslas, whether that comes in the form of flipping over tables or holding just weird pride parades and screaming matches on cameras or screaming on the floor of the Senate. All right, we're going to find out tonight if it really is resonating with the rest of the country in places like Florida and Wisconsin. We're going to head over to talk about this incoming fiscal cliff with Social Security and how Congress is going to need to start taking some things seriously. It is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC. Be right back.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC. I'm sure that you have heard about a million things in the last couple of weeks about the continuing resolution and the national debt and raising the debt limit, and then, of course, throwing tariffs into the mix. So you don't just bring on one guy and nail them to the chalkboard on every single subject. You break it down piece by piece. And to talk a little bit about the national debt and the structuring of the United States finance side of things, we brought on Mike Murphy. He's the Senior Vice President and the Chief of Staff for the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Thanks, Tony, for having me. It's great to be on with you.
So obviously we could talk about the massive storm of tension, a little bit of chaos, perhaps, on getting the financial system into play at the beginning of a presidential administration. Anywho, but there's an extra layer of uncertainty when you're talking about how much revenue tariffs may or may not face. I know you guys aren't the group that's tackling tariffs primarily, but what's it like working in that environment right now, just off the bat?
It's an incredibly dynamic environment when it comes to both economic and fiscal policy in Washington and broadly policy this year for sure. When it comes to tariffs, it is a very difficult one for all sorts of reasons to try to wrap one's head around. From a fiscal budgetary perspective, there's no doubt that tariffs can and would generate revenue. Now, let's putting aside, by the way, there's geopolitical reasons to or to not use tariffs. broader macroeconomic reasons of why many people don't think it's a smart economic policy. But I think that from a fiscal perspective, it can generate revenue. But because the president has used it kind of as an on again, off again kind of negotiating tactic, it's very hard to see how it's very hard to score it, like how much that would actually generate in revenue. And what we're actually worried about is that from a fiscal perspective, some of what's going on with tariffs is that at the same time they're doing tariffs out of the White House, in Congress, they're trying to advance a big agenda, right, in Congress, covering a lot of different issues. And they could claim that they're trying to pay for some of that with the tariffs, which may not fully add up, let's just say.
Well, there's a little bit of uncertainty regarding how much of the federal budget, if you want to call it a budget, or how much of the most recent continuing resolution, or how much of the national debt, looking ahead, is going to be paid by these kind of financial measures. But I hear about this all the time from every group and every faction in kind of the right side of the aisle that's looking at making policy, and it's all aimed at reducing the national debt. Not to ask a really obvious question, but just for the sake of getting on the same footing here, why is everyone so focused on every fiscal policy reducing the national debt?
Well, short answer is because the debt that we have right now as a country, and more in particular where it's headed going forward, is completely unsustainable from an economic...
Why do you say where it's going being unsustainable?
Yeah, so I'll explain that a little bit, Tony, real quick, just sort of taking a step back. When people think about the national debt, they're thinking about the big $36 trillion national debt. It's huge. It's kind of hard to get your head around. Economists and folks like us, when we look at the national debt, what we're looking at is our public debt, how much is outstanding on the markets relative to the size of your economy. It's called a debt as a percentage of GDP ratio. The reason you do that is it gives you a sense of how much underlying resources a country has to service that debt. You can also compare it all across time, compare it across countries. When you look at that measure of the debt, we are at levels of debt right now that are approaching about 100% the size of our economy. We have not seen these levels of debt since right after World War II. That's when we had the historic high in this country, 106% of the economy. The difference is, after World War II, it was expected to and did come down because we were done borrowing to defend the free world. Right now, we are borrowing for consumption, and the difference is it's projected to just continue going up and up and up for years. That, Tony, is why people are concerned about it. It's our big debt levels are at historically high and growing amounts.
And I know there's a real growth-driven reasoning behind the conversation on kind of the more populist side of the Republican Party, talking about how we're going to outgrow the national debt. Oh, well, we're going to change these policies so that United States revenue becomes so, the rivers are going to run with gold that it's going to outgrow the national debt, and that's how it's going to be paid off. But if you're talking about the debt coming through in consumption, and the debt's interest payments growing and growing and growing, I mean, there is a real concern that we may not even be able to leverage our economy to pay the interest payments on the national debt itself. And at that point, how useful is the United States debt to other countries, if they're looking at investing in our treasury and things like that?
So there's a lot in that question, Tony.
Sorry about that.
No. It's a lot to unpack. It's a really good question. So the first off, to point about economic growth helping solve the debt problem, that is commonly put forward, and I wish it were that easy, right? To just generate, generate more growth, you can solve our debt problem. Mm-hmm. Of course, generating more growth than projected does help increase revenues, which can help the debt problem. The problem is, most people look at this realistically. You would need unprecedented levels of economic growth when you take into account the fact that we have an aging population and those kind of issues. Mm-hmm. It's going to be almost impossible to generate by growth. So it leads to, people like to put that forward as an answer because they want to avoid the tough issues. The tough issues are, this is simple. You got two sides of the ledger aside of that. You got to reduce projected spending, or you got to raise some revenues from the tax side. And both of those things are not easy to do from a political sense.
Of
and
course.
That's what the issue is. And particularly when, and you were kind of getting at this a little bit, when 87% of your projected spending growth, 87% is due to three things. It's due to healthcare programs, it's due to Social Security, and it's due to interest on the debt. Interest costs are now the fastest growing line item in the budget. We spend more on interest in a given year than we do on defense. And that's obviously a fulfilling cycle. It just kind of feeds on itself.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the issue. And yes, to where you landed with your question, if you keep going down this path, a lot of people are concerned about you could eventually see what they call a quote unquote fiscal crisis. This is when all of a sudden investors, people that lend the United States money quickly and precipitously won't be willing to lend it at those prevailing rates anymore because they don't think the United States has its house in order. Mm-hmm. That's probably not going to happen this year, anytime in the immediate future. But you don't want to keep going down that path and test that. Other countries throughout history have seen that, and you eventually will get there.
That's that too big to fail fallacy that has been proven to be a fallacy time and time and time and time again.
Correct.
So I get a little bit of a vibe, to use the millennial term here, when you were describing the outgrowing of the national debt in the way that you did, that it reminded me of the individual who was down to kind of like the mob and saying, look, if you just give me till the next payday, I'll have the money to pay you back. If you just give me till the next payday, you just let me work a little bit longer, and nothing really changes. You know, they're like, well, my ship will come in and I'll be able to do all of this stuff if I just have a little bit more time. And it's a way of whistling past the graveyard while at the same time you're sinking deeper and deeper and deeper into the muck and the mire. And I think you're right. These are tough decisions that have to be made because entitlements have to be cut. People don't like that because this country desperately loves high spending and low taxes. And those two things don't go together. That's not a thing. And it's that political third rail that neither party can really win electorally with at the moment. And man, that's a problem. That's a major problem.
It's a huge problem. And I'll build off that by saying, let's take Social Security. So Social Security is the third rail, as you said. But here's the thing about Social Security. It's such a fundamentally important and popular program. I haven't seen polling on it lately, but I would guess it's got to be like the most popular federal program. And Social Security in and of itself is projected to go insolvent within 8 years or so. So when that happens, this is early 2030s, Tony, when that happens, there will be mandated across the board cuts to everybody on the program. That's what they would have to do to make benefits lined up with revenues. They mandated to have to do that. The trustees for the program have been projecting that's coming for years now. It changes. It's a little bit 2031, 33, 32, but it's basically been around there for years. And that is a drastic impact on people. When we've been traveling around the country, I was actually in Indiana recently and talking to people about it. Most people have no idea that that's coming. They know that the program's got some financial problems, but they don't know that. And when you tell people that, they realize, oh, we got to do something about this. And then what you have to then do is tie it to, you can be realistic on the political calendar, political incentives. It just so happens to be the case that next year, when you start to have Senate elections, senators on 6-year terms, people that get elected to the Senate next year, they start to be within that window of when Social Security is going to go insolvent. They're not going to be able to punt on this any longer. And people are going to have to start to press them about, we know this is going to impact us and people we know and love that are on this program. What are you going to do to make this solvent? You solve Social Security, it doesn't solve your entire budget problem, Tony. There's more you'd have to do. But let's just say you go a long way at helping your budget problem because it is the biggest program in the federal budget.
Well, I mean, it's like, you have a garage that's a complete and utter mess. And, you say, well, we're going to start by picking up all of the loose items on the ground and on top of the furniture that's crowding out everywhere. Is it going to solve the problem? No. But after you get that done, you look at the garage and you're like, yeah, this is doable now. We can kind of work on this. And Social Security is the 2-foot deep pile of garbage that is destroying the federal budget. And I know maybe it's easier to say because I'm young, but it's so easy to look at the data here and see this massive mismanaged crisis that I'm never going to see a cent from, that I'm still being forced to pay into this Ponzi scheme. And it frustrates me because we're looking at this political third rail and punting it. And you and I both know that when we do get to this fiscal crisis in the early 30s, that all of a sudden the selective amnesia is going to kick in. Oh, I had no idea this was good. Did you know? No, I had no idea. And when that comes, there will not be enough clown noses and bike horns to honk simultaneously to cover up for the clown noises.
Completely agree. When I think about what the impacts are of our fiscal situation. This is probably one of the hardest things, Tony, that like a group like us has to reckon with. Is how do you explain why this actually matters to people? Like, people get a sense that the budget problems matter, but does it really matter to people individually? There's lots of reasons. It's economic reasons, like it's slow growth in wages, national security reasons. Like I said before, we're spending more on interest than we do on defense. That's a big problem, national security. But you're hitting on the other one that really actually got me engaged on these issues years ago. I just think it's morally wrong that when you know that these issues are coming and they're coming down the line, and it's basic math, that you're just continuing to punt these decisions from years from now, that you eventually have to deal with them. And guess what? When you actually deal with them sooner, they're easier. You can phase things in. You get to spread them over more years and more people. It's actually lots of reason to do it sooner. But that's the key issue, is we keep punting these decisions. And you're exactly right. If we think people are frustrated and angry now about the political system, just wait until we get to a point where Social Security's hanging out there, might be getting cut, and people realize, oh, they could have actually solved this years ago.
So, and I think this is kind of where we'll cap things off. I think that we've separated issues into this country into fiscal issues and cultural issues, or governance issue, whatever you want to call it. You know, the stuff that's not really fun to talk about, the nuts and bolts of governance, and the culture issues that are the mortar that holds all of those bricks together. I would argue that the fiscal spending is a moral issue, but not in the same way of it's not moral to take debt and it's not moral to kick a can down the road. I get that, but I think that you can make these conversations relevant and point out quite clearly how magic solutions and snake oil salesmen, wherever they may be from, that say, oh, it's just gonna go away on its own, is dishonest. And I really just can't flip that another way. And I think that's a huge cultural issue that for a group of people who is, once again, becoming more involved politically for the first time really since the collapse of the Cold War, yeah, I would say that it's about time to make that a core issue.
I agree. And I think it's easy to kind of get wrapped up in budget and fiscal issues, just kind of dollars and cents kind of numbers.
The account wrestle with or whatever. Yeah.
Things that economists kind of care about. When I've always thought about this, because I'm not an economist, I've thought about this as I think it's a values issue. It's like that cliche that's like a budget should be a statement of your values as a country. And when you just understand this budget enough and what we're doing.
Oh, that's not cliche at all. I'm sorry. I got to push back on you to back you up here. That's not cliche. A budget should be a statement of your values, because what could be more America first than making sure that they are taken care of financially, not in a nanny state way, but that they have the necessary resources they need to seek after that American dream.
I totally agree. I was going to say, some people may think it's cliche, but it's not. It's just a kind of quaint thing people say. I genuinely believe that. I think a country's budget and fiscal foundation should reflect who we are as a country and our values. And when you look at the budget now, what's only thing that's clear that we value, there's a lot of things one can make of it, but the one thing that's clear is we value debt. We value financing, right, our past, instead of better preparing for our future. That is how it's working. And that is, Tony, how we can get some of this, like a little bit of a cultural issue. It's got to get people fired up to realize that we're punting these decisions, and we got to get to work on it now, because it impacts everything else if you don't have your fiscal foundation in order.
And it's gambling. I mean, it just says we're gambling. And I, not to, now I will really, kind of shift into cliche here, but it reminds me of the tut-tutting voice of Qui-Gon near the end of The Phantom Menace.
Whenever you gamble, my friend, eventually you lose.
And I just don't want to see that kind of loss for my country. Unfortunately, we're a little short on time. Mike Murphy, Senior Vice President, Chief of Staff for the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you, Tony, for having me.
We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Well, it is not getting any better for Democrats as we see additional voting information come out from Florida's 6th. It appears that Republicans are, let's see, the proper term here would be shellacking the Democrats, and it is just not getting any better at all. The state senator, Randy Fine, is not only coming through one of the most massive spending disparities I have seen. I mean, when you are outspent by like 30 times, it's pretty impressive stuff here. I'm not necessarily expecting that the 1st Congressional District, which is, again, has part in the Panhandle there, polls in that district, which are in the Central Time Zone, close at 8 p.m. Eastern. The Wisconsin Supreme Court race closes at 9 p.m. Eastern. And we've talked just a little bit over the last couple of minutes here about things that Republicans need to be looking for in the next couple of months as they get ready for midterms. That kind of spending all of your effort, all of your time on every single election is what a political party is for. And if the RNC is not spending every waking moment campaigning for every seat, just like the left is, then they're going to lose. Because when Democrats turn out, they turn out in the exact same way almost every single time. The coalition on the left, that LGBTQ plus whatever, and then the last clinging group of suburban women is all they got. They turn out about the same numbers every time. When Republicans, therefore, turn out, they win. And when they don't turn out, they lose. Because that's when you have the same constant pretty much for the left every time, then it really becomes a numbers game, which again, I know that's a very Charles Barkley-esque analysis, but you know, it's true. So again, Randy Fine's polling away, currently 54% of the vote to Josh Wells' 45.4% of the vote. That's with 82% reporting. We'll have more on that coming in. This brings us over to some lovely modern current clips that have riddled my very soul. And producer Reeve, who's new to the show, collects some of these clips and sends them to me with a small title. I haven't seen these. Now, that gives Allison over on the radio side of things a good amount of nervousness, so maybe keep your hand over the dump button in case we need anything censored, Allison. This first one just says, coworker mad that other coworker turned out to be conservative. I have my concerns.
Found out today that somebody that I work with is a conservative, and he's somebody who's really intelligent, and he's somebody who works in climate tech as a super smart guy, somebody I would never have thought was conservative, and apparently he is. And it's surprising, and it's disgusting. But what's most surprising to me is the level of sudden hatred that I have for him. Sudden hatred for this man who I used to respect suddenly just went boop, and I hate him now.
Yeah, that's mentally stable. Yeah, that's the party of science and understanding and empathy. Your colleague has political views that are a little bit different than your own, so you hate him. We hates him, precious. We hates it forever. Not very mentally stable. That it does bring a little bit of perspective to the tantrums that are coming in the form of domestic terrorism, where upon seeing a Tesla, the liberal reacts as a bull chasing after the red handkerchief waved in their face, drawing very poorly constructed swastikas on the side of the Tesla. It doesn't really showcase high forms of intelligence, but that is where we are. This next one says John Boyega, which would be the actor Finn from Star Wars. Apparently he's very mad. I think I have seen this one. He's angry that there aren't enough black heroes in Star Wars, and that apparently is Star Wars fans' problem, or like it's their fault.
They're pandering. Let me tell you, Star Wars always had the vibe of being in the most whitest elite space. Like, this franchise is so white that it's like a black person existing in that was something. And you can always tell it's something when some Star Wars fans try to say, well, we had Lando Calrissian and had Samuel L. Jackson. It's like telling me how many cookie chips are on the cookie dough. I'm like, bro, they just scattered that in there, bro. They're okay with us playing the best friend. But once we touch their heroes, once we lead, once we trailblaze, it's like, oh my God, it's just a bit too much.
I seem to remember a lot of Star Wars fans pointing out that Finn got royally screwed over in the sequel trilogy by not being a main character, infinitely more interesting than Rey. In fact, probably the most compelling character of anyone, and they ruined him to make him kiss the chubby girl in the second one, whose entire like scope and size of her character was, we gotta believe, Finn, because when you believe, it's not about fighting, it's about love. All right, rather bold move, but you know, John Boyega, he struggles just a little bit here. And that brings us to blue-haired lib shrieks about transgenderism. All right. Reeve, you're fired. You're fired. April Fool's Day or not, you're fired. Rickrolling me in my own... Fired. Gone. Scraped away. Utterly just be gone. I expect you to file the pink slip away with HR. Rickrolling me on my own. I tell you what, ridiculous. All right, radio crew. Unfortunately, we have to start rounding you off, but we are getting ready to see polls close in Florida's 1st Congressional. We're going to cover that over on the live stream and on some of the syndication network. So make sure you head over there to youtube.com/Daily Signal as we start covering the numbers out of the Florida 1st in the Panhandle. And all I can say is it's going to be an interesting night based on turnout so far. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. All right, now that the radio crew is off into their FCC regulated commercial land, there is one other clip that I do want to get to, and this is from Greg Gutfeld. And because there was this comedian who was very upset that she didn't get invited to be the White House press correspondent. I had never heard this story of how Trump handled Bill Maher, but it's pretty fantastic. Check it out.
2015, and he has been relentless, really, ever since.
Yeah, well, Bill, when he showed up at the White House, he had actually brought a list of insults Trump had said about him and gave it to Trump. And what did he do? He signed it, which is very Trumpian. And they laughed and they laughed. Kudos to Maher. You know, he knows this is going to burn whatever bridge that remains with the tolerant left. But he said full steam ahead. And you got to give credit to Kid Rock. You know, he went out.
I just enjoy that particular story here. There's something about just looking at someone who hates you just square in the face and signing their list of insults for you. And again, that kind of casual, I don't know what you're freaking out about, that the Trump administration is bringing to the administration is something that Americans do appreciate. When there is competence that's going on, it's never, that's never a 100% guarantee for any administration. But in the Trump administration specifically, when I look at how the Trump administration has handled people that are angry, people that say, oh, scandal, oh, that Maryland father who was a member of MS-13, but he has a child. Is he here legally? No. The Trump administration just says, no, we're going to give him the boot. In fact, by the way, here's Carolyn Levitt earlier today making that particular point to reporters, again, trying the desperate pearl-clutching strategy over the MS-13 gang member.
1 second. The administration has expressed a complete confidence in how all the deportation flights to El Salvador were conducted. But now that the administration has conceded that there was an error of one Salvadoran national, will there be any reviews conducted? And does the president express any thoughts on the one error that was disclosed in court last night?
Well, first of all, the error that you are referring to was a clerical error. It was an administrative error. The administration maintains the position that this individual who was deported to El Salvador and will not be returning to our country was a member of the brutal and vicious MS-13 gang. That is fact number one. Fact number two, we also have credible intelligence proving that this individual was involved in human trafficking. And fact number three, this individual was a member, actually a leader of the brutal MS-13 gang, which this president has designated as a foreign terrorist organization. Fact number 4 is that foreign terrorists do not have legal protections in the United States of America anymore, and it is within the president's executive authority and power to deport these heinous individuals from American communities. It is a promise he campaigned on. It is a promise he is keeping. And every single person in this room should be grateful for that, considering especially MS-13 is very prevalent and prominent here in the District of Columbia, in Maryland, and in Virginia. And the president, the attorney general, everyone who has been involved in these operations is focused on eradicating these criminals and terrorists from our communities.
And by the way, it is quite clear to the American public that no matter how many times we see these stories, and by the way, we've literally predicted this kind of stuff since the election night. We said as soon as Trump won, we said the following day that the first thing you were going to see if Trump went through with his administration, a plan on illegal immigration, that you were going to have the left just waiting on hand and foot for the picture of like the pregnant mom with cancer who might be deported, or we said, oh, the family that's going to be separated. Here it is. The Atlantic waited for it. And in their haste to get this story out as quickly as possible, they screwed up. They goofed. And they ended up publishing, or excuse me, they ended up leaving information about the illegal immigrant, the member of MS-13 that was kicked out to El Salvador. They left that out. They left out the findings from the 2019 ruling. And that is going to bite them in the rear, and it's going to cost the Atlantic, I say cost the Atlantic credibility. The Atlantic doesn't have any credibility. Now, that brings us to 8:02 p.m. Eastern Time, making it, you guessed it, Math Wizards, 7:02 Central. The polls have closed in the Florida 1st District. The race between Jimmy Patronis for the Republicans and Gay Valamont for the Democrats. I haven't followed the individual political campaign strategies for the comm side of this particular race, but I would assume that there were a lot of posts about how no one is allowed to say gay in Florida, so Gay Valamont is some freedom fighter candidate. Anywho, breaking from producer Daniel. Breaking news from producer Daniel. According to several sources, including Daniel, I want to check. Is this? You say it's called already? Is that from Decision Desk? Can you find who's calling it already for us? Because I want to make sure we get this right. With just 9.8% of the votes counted, the race has been called by Decision Desk. Thank you, for Republican candidate Jimmy Patronis. This means that Republicans have kept in these special elections that Democrats pumped money into, like a young pop star pumps heroin. We're talking serious amounts of cash into these races. And Republicans have maintained control of both former Representative Mike Waltz's seat and former Representative Matt Gaetz' seat. So we are looking at Representative-elect Jimmy Patronis and Representative-elect Randy Fine. This brings us down to the very interesting cases of the Wisconsin Supreme Court election. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to move on so quickly. That's hilarious. The reason that's hilarious is because this is how elections should operate. Every time we get around to dealing with Maricopa County in Arizona, or we get around to Fulton County in Georgia, or we get around to all of these other places around the country, like the entire state of California, who is counting votes 5-6 days after the election and expects Americans to consider that a decent and secure form of voting. And by the way, I want to make that clear because it's not just Republicans who have concerns. We were told that it was just some type of a Republican conspiracy theory. It was just Republicans muddy-fuddy-duddying and no one else about the security of elections. But I would like to point out here at this Tim Walz rally just a couple of days ago that the entire argument from the leftist suburban lady who's a little less than healthy, but not particularly important, claiming that, these Republicans are out here stealing elections. The election security is at stake.
We see one of the first things they do is try and restrict the vote. This is one of the things, though, that this is going to take power to the streets. I don't know what the answer is on this, but I've been saying this. I think we need a shadow government, so when all these things come up every single day, we've got an alternate press conference telling the truth about what things are happening, telling what's going out.
So that's his answer to this rather silly goose. I'm trying to find the right clip to put up. I may not have it ready to load. Her entire case to good old, on the ball Tim Walz was that Republicans, there was this study that came out and showed that Republicans were technologically manipulating elections. Oh, just those stinky Republicans where, a couple of years ago, I was told that if you suggested that some elections in the United States were not secure, then you were some kind of deep and stinky, terrible insurrectionist. We'll see if it's this one here.
I said this and
No, we'll find the clip a little bit later. I think we played it on a recent episode. So if Florida's able to actually churn out these votes in real time and get these two Americans this quickly so that 4 minutes after the polls closed, producer Daniel can get a hold of me and let me know that Jimmy Petronas is so far ahead now with an 802, 10% reporting that, now they're going to go ahead and call the election. Now, Decision Desk isn't the only one who's called the election. While the live updates from sites like Washington Post say that, Gay Valmont has taken the lead very closely here, given that Crestview hasn't even been counted yet. And I believe, let me make sure I have this checked right. Yes, we are currently still broadcasting down in Pensacola. So there are other outlets that are calling the race for Jimmy Petronas. Over on the Decision Desk side of things, Jimmy Petronas now has a double-digit point lead over Gay Valmont. Stephen Broden, the other party, has got 202 votes at the moment. He ain't going nowhere. So the Republicans are actually performing pretty consistently in the Florida election here. And given that Florida is now the state that Democrats are struggling even with tens of millions of dollars to touch, what does this mean going forward for Republican strategy in possible special elections and the midterms? You have to put all you have into these elections. And again, we talked about this a little bit earlier. This is why the left despises Elon Musk. Because if Elon Musk gets out in front of the country as the owner of the largest social media platform in politics, it's where news breaks. It's where news propagates. It's where public statements are made. Everything else is secondary and tertiary. That Elon Musk at this moment understands that if he puts the nation's attention on these elections in the same way that the entire left apparatus does, on CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and the LA Times and the Washington Post and the Daily Beast and the Daily Man, and like just on and on and on and on and on. Then if Republicans put a little attention there and actually get people out to vote in the same way that Democrats come out to vote for every single election, then Republicans end up winning. Because Republicans, and by extension, the populist faction, the conservative faction, the libertarian faction, and the populist, libertarian, conservative, and the establishment wings. If all four of those factions of the Republican Party are on the 80 side of 80-20 issues, on things like illegal immigration, on things like crime, on things like keeping LGBTQ plus whatever stuff away from children, on keeping men out of women's sports, on very common sense things, on Israel over Hamas and Iran, on competence and meritocracy over all other kinds of silly discriminatory methodology. If you see Republicans in all factions taking that side of the stuff, then if Republicans come out, they win. Case in point, now we're looking at the Wisconsin Supreme Court election, which is going to be very, very, very close. Early numbers so far in Wisconsin indicate that Republicans are doing better than was expected so far in exit polling, you can't really trust or tell how, exit polling is going so far, because, anyone can say whatever they want or, be completely quiet, as far as a particular, election is concerned. Right now, as far as early ballots are concerned, Republicans are just barely behind. Now, that's not great, obviously, but it's also not terrible, because usually Democrats shellac Republicans in early voting. The money that has flowed into this race has been unreal. 98% of Susan Crawford's funding came from out of state, from groups funded and owned and operated by George Soros. 98% of her money, massive amounts of cash, going into that race in Wisconsin. And Susan Crawford is not like a, kind of cool-headed, trying to kind of sneak past type of justice. She is extremely far to the left. Believes that the Constitution is up to the interpretation of feelings as opposed to any type of contextual originalism at all. The lady who let a guy who sexually abused little girls and was convicted of sexual abuse of little girls off of a 4-year prison sentence, which is insane, now wants to be the lady that would tilt the balance of the Wisconsin Supreme Court over to the left, and would therefore allow the Wisconsin Supreme Court to rule on behalf of those who desire to gerrymander congressional districts in Wisconsin and make it next to impossible for Republicans to maintain seats in the House. And these gerrymandered maps that have been suggested look like spaghetti mixed with drunk pool noodles. It's horrible. It makes Croatia look like a solid region. Now, on the national side of things, because the way the election goes tonight is going to have, at this point, with Florida's 1st and Florida's 6th called for Republicans, if the election now shifts in favor of Susan Crawford, then you're going to have a very mixed message coming out of both the administration, coming out of the focal point of the country, as far as general polling is concerned on how the Trump administration is doing. The left is going to claim that Susan Crawford's election was going to be some kind of referendum against Donald Trump, and it's the country standing against Elon Musk and his billionaires and other kinds of nonsense. I don't know if you can take what is likely going to be a very, very close election in Wisconsin. And by the way, as someone who worked in Governor Scott Walker's office, as someone who went to college in Wisconsin and is familiar with the political structure of Wisconsin itself, allow me to be one of the first to inform you, elections in Wisconsin over the last couple of years have been consistently close, quite often. Now, Trump has a couple of things here that is playing to his advantage that is really going to make the margin of Brad Schimmel versus Susan Crawford a little bit hairier than the left is predicting. This being that Trump is largely more favorable with union members than Kamala Harris. I guarantee it is no coincidence that Donald Trump's plan for tariffs, and whether they are more reciprocal and retaliatory than aggressive internationally, is in fact put on April the 2nd so that it follows the special elections in Florida and the Supreme Court election in Wisconsin. Because right now in Wisconsin, you have a very, very large union base from Kenosha up through Milwaukee and then pretty much up the coast to around, petering out about halfway up to Green Bay. That is a very strong union bloc in that state. Detroit Light, or suburban Detroit, as I've colloquially called the area. Milwaukee has a very strong union base that is more favorable to Trump. It is why Trump has carried that swing state against Hillary Clinton and against Kamala Harris. Now you've got Crawford, whom Trump has, not endorsed. You've had Elon Musk campaigning in the area, which of course union members don't like, but also Trump has endorsed. Well, Brad Schimmel. And that's a particular problem for union member support. And here's why. I want to make this clear. it is not because I think that you're going to see union members coming out in droves to vote for Brad Schimmel. No. Like the 2024 election and the presidential, it's not about who comes out to vote for the Democrats. It's about who doesn't come out to vote. When the left takes the 20 version of the 80-20 issues, they keep their voting base down at LGBTQ plus 2IA whatever individuals and activists, the pro-Hamas nicks, and suburban women, usually with a college degree. The really insufferable kind of suburban women. Most of the time, white women. That's their base that is sticking with them through thick and thin. Unless we're in Dearborn, and that's another topic for another time. When it comes to Wisconsin, a huge portion of the voting bloc used to be union family households. And still in a large part it's just not voting unilaterally blue anymore. And if Wisconsin races are already their own brand of hot mess, then you've got the Democrats in some serious trouble. Now, again, George Soros groups have spent inordinate amounts of money in this particular race. Over $90 million total in the race. $40 million has been spent up leading to the election by the Susan Crawford backers. And so many millions have come in since this particular article was published yesterday. Go figure. It looks like this race might have crossed the $100 million mark. Wow. That is nuts. And by the way, that includes about, $20 million in the race supporting Schimmel from Tesla, the America PAC, $12 million, Building America's Future, $6 million, Musk giving $2 million to the Republican Party of Wisconsin. And then Musk actually showed up on a rally on Sunday and gave away just two $1 million checks just kind of at random to attendees at the rally. People say, oh, it's very bad. How could a billionaire be getting involved in elections? Because the shoe is on the other foot now. They're not quite a fan of the fit. George Soros and other leftist billionaires, by the way, like for quite a long time, guys like Mark Zuckerberg, and back when he used to own Twitter, guys like Jack Dorsey, and the founders of Google, and the wife of the late Steve Jobs, and other individuals on the very, very wealthy Bill Gates and Melinda, who took half his dough. A lot of money flowed in from left-leaning groups and far-left groups into elections. But all of a sudden, Elon Musk gets out here and says, well, I have money. I'll throw it into elections. And even the playing field out. And the left is losing the mind. They're saying, well, Elon Musk has spent like $32 million. Whereas leftist billionaires spent $40 million for Susan Crawford on the liberal side of things, on the living documentarian side of constitutional interpretation, or as I like to call it, how stupid people read. It is going to be a considerably long night given how close this election is getting. We're looking at some of the new election data. The polls do not close in Wisconsin for another 40 minutes. If you are listening or tuning in over in Wisconsin, whatever you do, stay in line. Make sure that your vote is in. Now, from some analyst calculations here, 60% of those who voted in the presidential election in 2024 voted in the special election in Stevenson Township in northeast Wisconsin as of 1:30 today. We're also seeing some kind of earlier polling numbers coming out, which are suggesting that it really is a dead heat between the number of individuals coming out and saying that they voted for Brad and that they voted for Susan. You get some interesting cases when it comes to special elections like this because there's really not much to futz with either way. And so what you end up getting is an argument of character for two people. A special election is a micro-presidential. as opposed to a sweeping ballot issue. And if you can actually create enough national interest in an election over two individuals, so you start getting clips aired and played about, what it is that they're saying and how they're doing things, well, then you get into a situation where it's a lot harder for candidates to remain in obscurity and therefore enjoy some kind of immunity from, people not really caring about a particular election. One of the clips that has gone around haunting Susan Crawford is not even, directly involving, Susan Crawford. It's of House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries getting out in front of the public and basically admitting that the key reason Democrats are so desperately concerned with this race is their desire to redraw the Wisconsin congressional maps. And I don't care who you are, that sounds dirty. Anytime that an election is built on the backs of we are going to change how election districts are drawn and redrawn in the future, that comes across as real shady. Because think about it. If your entire goal in a particular election is then to turn around and make future elections more difficult for your opponent. And this is what the left, by the way, comes out with in their accusation for Republicans. They say Republicans want to make it more difficult for minorities to vote because voter ID laws are really out of reach of those on the left who really want to get out to vote, but they can't, which is incredibly insulting. The idea that you would have people too stupid to go out and get an ID to vote is, what some might consider racist, in fact. But, I digress. I just don't believe at the moment that American people, especially in Wisconsin, whose voter population has been really keyed in on issues over the last couple of months, especially since the election. A lot of poll numbers from Wisconsin are very strong in representation. What that means is that we've seen a lot of people who, when called to ask if they will participate in a poll in the state of Wisconsin, say, yes, I'm ready to go. When it takes you less time to go through a survey in a particular region, because you have people who aren't, let me explain kind of the counter here. Whenever I get in front of people and I ask a poll, when I was writing with Chalkboard Review, for example, I ran a poll asking only Midwestern teachers if they were going to stay in the classroom at the end of the year or they weren't. And I did all of the various survey work that has to go into things. And I said, okay, this is what I want to do. This is, what I don't want to do, and on and so forth. You have so many people, so many people who have, as soon as they're asked a question about polling, immediately the phone just goes down, click, no thanks, don't want to, don't want to talk, don't want to go through the poll, don't want to have any kind of a conversation, no thank you. But in Wisconsin, it appears, I guess, again, according to how the polling is conducted in the Midwest, that individuals who are being polled in Wisconsin are very quick, very ready to answer the polls. And the polls are largely in favor of the Trump administration. Now, again, that poses an interesting conundrum for those over on the left. Because if you're looking at an election where more people are tuned in and more people are involved in the particular election cycle, and you don't have the conservative-backed candidate, the originalist candidate in this case, who has any significant scandals. You're not seeing any major, Brad Schimmel paid for, a lady's abortion like we were talking about down in the Georgia Senate race a couple of years ago, or oh, he's a charlatan, kind of like the whole Dr. Oz argument and things. If that's not plaguing the candidate, and people are interested, they're invested, they're paying attention, they're not asleep at the wheel, so to speak, it's going to be more unlikely that the Democrats are going to be able to hide clips like these, for instance, from the voting base.
In Wisconsin, that's a 50-50 race because we know Wisconsin's a 50-50 state.
Yeah.
And we have a strong Democratic candidate. Whoever wins is going to determine who has the majority in the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
Now, by the way, I want to make that very clear that in a couple of hours, when you have individuals claiming that either Susan Crawford or Brad Schimmel, whomever it is, who ends up getting the victory in that race, that they're nonpartisan and they're just a judge, they're just a justice, I'm just a girl. Like, they're just totally normal, no problem. They're just about, upholding the law. Or that's if Susan Crawford wins. If Susan Crawford wins, then she's totally apolitical. Hakeem Jeffress just made it clear she is a Democratic candidate. So as far as the left honoring like the impartial, work of the judicial, that is such a load of crap. And anyone who tells you that, just like school board races, oh, these races are nonpartisan, they're lying to you. They are lying to you. Everyone in politics, from the pundit to the analyst to the staffer to the campaign staff to the comm staff to fundraising to the policy and legislative team, all of them understands every political office. If there is a vote behind it, it is political. Period. End of story. And here in a few hours, if you hear, I guarantee it, I'm Mark Moore, it is 8:26 p.m. Eastern Time. The polls in Wisconsin close in 23 minutes and 20 seconds. Mark my words, that if Susan Crawford pulls this off, they will immediately go to saying about how she's just impartial and she's like for fighting for rights, man. She's just a normal, happy-go-lucky. And here is Hakeem Jeffries making it very clear she is 100% not.
And we have a strong Democratic candidate. Whoever wins is going to determine who has the majority in the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Why is that important? Because there are gerrymandered congressional lines right now in Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a 50-50 state, as I mentioned, but there are 6 Republicans and only 2 Democrats out of an 8-person delegation because the lines are broken.
Right.
And as soon as possible, we need to be able to revisit that and have fair lines. The only way for that to be even a significant possibility is if you have an enlightened Supreme Court. And so, I think that's an incredibly important race.
I love it so much. He's making the case that the Wisconsin congressional map at the present time is like hopelessly, just terribly, gerrymandered. Oh, it's just awful. It's horrible. I don't know how, we could ever, work past this. I am at the moment looking at the particular congressional map in just like right here in front of me. And the 7th congressional in Wisconsin bites into the 3rd congressional just a little bit. So Eau Claire and then La Crosse and, Grant, Crawford, Pierce counties over on the western side of Wisconsin threads through part of Adams County and then up into Portage County. So there's basically, it looks like a guy serving, a hamburger, a box of a hamburger. And then you have a very large 7th congressional district. By the way, the reason that this district is mapped this way is because regionally, if you want to talk about cultural identity, that's how congressional districts, by the way, really should be done. I think that you should take a region that has a common core culture, industry base, civilian population. That is how it should be defined. Because that's how they're going to be represented. Otherwise, it needs to be just straight grid-based, like the Brits used to do long, long time ago. And the Democrats are upset because the 7th congressional district, which is large, cuts into a space that they think should belong to the 3rd, that they think should belong to the 8th, which includes part of, Brown County and therefore, Green Bay. And there's all of this anger over the Republicans in the state, being allowed to, again, map out a congressional district series. And the Supreme Court wants to rule that if Susan Crawford wins the election, unconstitutional, which again, makes no sense whatsoever at all. The idea that justices in this country, whether they're at the local level, whether at the state level, whether they're at the state Supreme Court, whether we're talking federal district judges, or we're talking about the appellate, or the Supreme Court itself, this idea that justices have unlimited authority to do whatever they want, and that they are basically miniature kings who allow things. So ruling by allowance. That as long as it's like the very, very old, not quite absolute monarchy, but like constitutional monarchies of how the Brits and the French used to do things. And so, yeah, sure, the National Assembly in France, yeah, they're allowed to, come up with laws, but if the king ever reaches a point where he doesn't like how those laws are being written and executed, the king can strike them down, call a new election to the National Assembly. By the way, you still have some of this in how, for example, the Prime Minister of France currently operates, where if they don't like how Parliament is doing things, if they don't like how certain aspects of the executive branch are doing things, they can call it quits and kick them out. We just saw this in France with Le Pen, who they said, well, some of her staffers were taking money because they worked for her, but they did things that weren't a part of her office, which is like the most made-up charge in the European Union's history. To try to ban her from elections with prison time that they waived and all other kinds of nonsense. In the United States right now, you have judicials who are acting as though they are kings and queens. And that if they just say, I declare it, like Michael Scott declaring bankruptcy, then they allow the United States to do whatever they want until they don't like it, and then they issue national injunctions. That's not how that's supposed to go. And I mean, again, apolitically, meaning that when the Biden administration was presiding, and that there were justices, for example, like the judge in Texas, who ruled that Texas didn't have to listen to Biden, that's not he's not allowed to do that. He's not. A judge in Texas is not allowed to tell Biden, oh yeah, you can't control the southern border of the United States from the federal government. Every state signed away those rights. They just did. We haven't been called these United States since before the Civil War. And if you want to make the argument that these United States still should get to individually mandate and legislate things like national defense on their own terms, then that needs to be a constitutional amendment, one that I would very much get behind, by the way. But I don't care who is in power. The idea that, well, the federal government has a lot of power, so what we're going to do to fix the executive branch having too much power is we're going to give justices way more power. No, you don't do it like a Superman comic, where like you just try to like throw in more power and raise the stakes every day until you have a crisis. No, you remove some of the power. You don't want Trump to have that much power. Shrink the federal agencies. Then you won't have these issues. Well, it's going to head to the Supreme Court either way. And unfortunately, and fortunately, at the same time, a little bittersweet for the country, this Supreme Court case in Wisconsin is going to have a considerable amount of impact, both in the races themselves, given, talking about the congressional races in Wisconsin, the balance of power in the House of Representatives, given the very thin majority, as well as the interpretation of things like right to work laws, in which people are not required to join a union in order to work in places. That's also on the table here. There's a lot of stuff that a balance shift in a Supreme Court is going to turn topsy-turvy very quickly. So we'll keep you up to date on that over on the Top News in 10. I think that about rounds it out. 40 minutes of bonus tonus, I'd say, is quite enough. Hope that you guys have an excellent evening. We will be back tomorrow with a breaking exclusive story from the offices of Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Jim Banks. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC. Take care.